Hey guys, how's it going? So, the custom group summon banner is coming back around where you can choose 3 characters that are non-collaboration RGB 5 stars to basically select a custom banner as the name suggests. And they can be limited units, and they also come with their artifacts, right? So just a quick rundown of how it works is pretty much you choose 3 characters like this. It shows which characters are limited and the artifacts right next to them, which is kind of nice. But something important to know is it seems like it lasts from 10:27 to 11:24. And from how they explain it, it seems like once you start summoning, you have 14 days to keep summoning. So I believe what you could do is wait until close to the end of the banner and then start summoning, and it'll extend it for 14 days. Because if you notice right here, it says 13 days remaining once they've started summoning. So I believe you can kind of extend the amount of total time if you wait a little while into the banner, if I'm reading it correctly. And that is how the old banner actually worked previously. But that one, the custom group summon, I think lasted like 3 months, so you had way more time total. But that appears to be how it works. You select 3 characters. Your artifacts you can also get from using the coins. So how it works is every time you summon, you get a coin. When you get 120 coins, you could select a character using them. But it's better than a normal pity system, because if you pull a 5-star on the way to pitying a character, like getting 120 coins, then you're able to just keep that 5-star and you keep the coins as well. So if you get any 5 stars on the way to pity, it's basically just a 2-for-1. It's way better. You're also able to trade 100 of those coins for an artifact if you'd rather have those. So very helpful stuff. And also the artifacts for the characters that you choose will appear in the powder shop while you've selected them on that banner, which is really helpful as well. So that's kind of the basic rundown of how this banner works. Let's talk about the characters now. So this is the tier list that I decided to make, the custom summon RGB tier list. And this is kind of how I spaced it out, is amazing picks, great picks, decent picks, weak picks, great imprints, great artifacts, and characters that you just are not allowed to choose. So you can't choose Yolha or Summer Break Charlotte, they're too recent. You can't choose Lua as well, because they're too recent. So I decided to just put these 4 characters in amazing picks, and let me explain why. I'll talk about the playstyles of the units, why they're good, etc. Diene and Landy are both limited units, so that kind of boosts up their rarity a little bit, right? Diene is a really good unit. We saw her non-stop in RTA. She's just an amazing PvP unit. Even in PvE, she's pretty useful. She became one of the quintessential supports of the entire game. She started to fall off ever so slightly, a tiny bit at the end of the last RTA season, just because characters like DJ Basar were kind of useful against her. And obviously Alencia is good against her. And now they're making a Runka, who seems like a pretty good character versus a team that has Diene on it. And also they're removing the 7 Soul Weaver speeds. That hurts her kind of like as a big opener, but I think she'll still be a very strong unit, and compared to a lot of these other characters, she's still going to be an amazingly useful unit for most people as a really good support. Okay, let's talk about Landy. She's one of those hyper carry kind of units. She can just solo carry an entire match, really insane damage. She really needs Guiding Light to work, but if you don't rely on Guiding Light, you can make a tanky bruiser counter Landy on Bloodstone that can be really strong. More of a standard playstyle generally, but can be used very aggressively if you make a speed damage Landy as well. Diene, on the other hand, is kind of a character that can be used in standard or aggressive play, or hell, I've even seen in cleave, right? So she's a very flexible unit. Landy is not really as much of a cleave unit as she is aggro or standard. Now let's talk about Politis. This is a character that's never really going to fall off in the game, because they have such a unique and special S2 ability that punishes non-attack skills and CR boosts. She can be chosen from like the episode 3 selector once you finish that, if you're lucky, but she is just such an incredible unit. She's a big cleave unit and is used all the time in cleave teams, and she's used in anti-cleave or anti-aggro teams all the time too. She's amazing versus characters like DJ Basar if you use Yellow Violin on her. People use her versus ML Lilius versus Diene. She just punishes so many non-attack skills, and there's no other character that really works the same way as she does. And she can be built so many different ways too, that she's just so flexible. Tamarinne, the reason she's here is she's pretty much considered the best PvE unit, at least the best non-ML PvE unit, because Spectre Timber is the best DPS, she's the best support. They're changing how labs work, so if you're doing the Nightmare difficulty Hell Raid lab, you're not going to be able to use her on every team, which kind of hurts her a little bit in usability, but she's still obviously going to be very useful for at least one run of that. She's going to be useful for all the other labyrinths. She's going to be useful for Abyss. She's still a great PvE character to have and useful for every single new player to really get their account going. So I also really recommend them if you're much newer, especially, and don't have her and could kind of use her. So let's talk about these picks now. So these are characters I'd consider to be great picks, just very strong in like RTA or Arena maybe, or Guild Wars possibly, but let's talk about them. So Alencia became one of the most popular units in the last RTA season. Her ability to strip buffs from characters like Diene and Kawerik, etc. is a very powerful ability. She can actually fight characters like Apocalypse Ravi and survive high damage. She can also fight characters like Choux, which is really great too. So she just is a super flexible unit, can be used in aggro or standard teams. And just became one of the most popular picks in the entire game after her buff. Just such a safe and powerful unit to have on your team as an earlier pick in the draft usually. And if you're really getting into RTA, she could be very useful for you. Now she's not really used in Cleave, but more standard and some aggro. Ida, this is a character you use in aggro or Cleave. She became one of the most popular units after her buff a long time ago, or those playstyles. You just use a non-attack skill and she's suddenly raring to go. She's an incredibly powerful unit to link the first turn character you have into the rest of your characters because she pushes up the team and pushes the opponents back, which is incredibly powerful. So I highly recommend her if you're really trying to play those playstyles because she's become one of the biggest picks for them and sometimes required to really make certain teams really mesh well together. Choux. So this character is actually about to get a skin that they just showed off, the cat Choux skin, and she's become one of the best ice units in the game. For sure one of the best ice bruisers in the game. There's not really many of those in the game currently because characters like SSB and Rem can't really be used the same way. She's incredibly strong versus high aggression and versus fire units, obviously. She was one of the Hwayoung killers pretty much. And she's just a really safe unit too. She doesn't really care about her cooldowns getting increased by characters like Lua and stuff like that. She doesn't really have a passive, so she doesn't care about Archdemon Mercedes or anything, which is really good. So she's just a pretty safe, flexible unit that does insane amounts of damage and can go toe-to-toe with basically any bruiser that's not green in the entire game, which is a really big deal. And she supports the team really well. Very, very good unit with an amazing imprint that's crit chance. That's also a big deal, right? Destina. She became one of the most popular Soul Weavers in the game, especially with the buff of DJ Basar, where shields are punished. She just straight up heals with no shields, which is really great. She's also amazing at cleansing against characters like Angel of Light and stuff. And she also became really popular in anti-cleave versus ML Pavel teams and like Sid teams, because her S3 not only heals and cleanses, but also is able to revive people with a little amount of health. So they have to kill Destina, because if she gets a turn, she's able to just revive her team and then wipe them. So she became a really popular pick in standard play and just anti-aggro play and anti-cleave. Really, really great character to have and very useful for pretty much everybody. Hwayoung. So she's getting nerfed and I'm going to be trying her out actually tonight. So maybe it's a little too soon to put her right here. And, you know, a lot of people have her already, but I feel as though Hwayoung might still be usable. She might still be an okay character. I'm just tentatively putting her here, right? Because she might actually suck, and I'll be trying her out. But, you know, she was, like, the best RGB character in the entire game, basically, and probably would have been up here before, but after a buff, probably not all that amazing. We'll have to see. Maybe Arunka is just going to be a better version of her nowadays. But I just thought I'd put her one tier lower than normal, just because it's entirely possible she might still be usable. But if she's not, then she's going to be, like, down to weak picks or decent picks at best. So Ran, this is a character you can only really use if you're cleaving, and he's really good. He's not as good as he once was. Like he's fallen off ever so slightly, just because people have more ways of really being able to fight him. But he's still a great unit. You just cleave people. Lots of people don't really know how to fight or deal with him, and he works really well. But he does require really good gear in a playstyle that requires incredibly good gear. So just keep that in mind, and he's not for everybody. Roana, this character is great in PvE, especially raids and stuff like that, and some challenge floors of Abyss. She is useful in PvE or PvP as well, and she's very specific unit versus characters like, let's say, Solitaria or counterattack AoEs like Belian, and she's amazing versus that kind of stuff. So she fulfills a niche that no other character can, which I think is a pretty big deal, and being useful in PvE is also great. SSB. So the reason she's here is mostly because she's a limited. I would say nowadays you don't really see that much SSB. She can be used as like a last pick in drafts, 100% works, but nowadays you don't really see too much of her. The main reason I have her is just because she is a limited unit and she didn't come around this entire year, which is kind of a big deal as well. So it might be pretty hard to get her if you don't get her now. That's the main reasoning. So you could consider it just because of the rarity aspect, and I think they might just never rerun some of the banners again, like her banner, so you have to get them off of custom, but it seems like they're doing more custom banners now, so maybe you can just wait. Senya. This character is absolutely amazing. Oh, let me also just say, SSB is more just standard play. Senya became an incredibly big pick after her buff, and if your opponent doesn't have cleanses, she kind of just solos their entire team, which is a pretty crazy thing. She really needs her artifact, which you can get off of her banner, obviously. But she can be used really aggressively, or actually defensively as well. She's a good anti-cleave character, she's a good aggro character, she's a good standard character. She can go toe-to-toe with almost all of the big bruisers in the game, which is a big deal, like soloing a Ravi and things like that. Lots of people hit Legend last season just purely making teams around picking Senya early in the draft, and that's their team, and they just support her every single game. Lots of people were able to hit Legend just with that kind of setup. So she's a really, really strong unit, so I would definitely have her up pretty high, even among some of these others, if you really can use her. And you can take some of the gear off of Hwayoung for her, actually, if Hwayoung ends up being really bad. Zahhak. So he's about to get a buff. So maybe it's a little too soon to say, but here's the thing about Zahhak. He's pretty easy to build, realistically. He only needs 50% crit chance. He has amazing base speed and good damage, good crit chance, decent attack. He is about to get a pretty big buff that makes him way more aggressive, able to put out way more damage. I think he's going to become a really big aggro pick and possibly even a cleave pick, because he almost operates sort of like a different sort of Strays, where he's able to S3, do a ton of damage, not kill something like Strays, then turn invulnerable, and then eventually get his next turn and do another big attack. So kind of similar thing to Strays, except the difference is he supports an ally pushing them up and giving them attack buff, which is really big. That's a huge deal, having him also be an attack buffer. So I think he's going to be a pretty nice pick. So I have him up here. He also counters some pretty great characters, like he completely wrecks Lionheart's Sturmia. He works very well versus Apocalypse Ravi with all that injury. Any health scaling units take so much injury damage that they become really weak after, which is really big too, even if he doesn't kill a unit. So I have him pretty high up for those reasons. Decent picks. These are characters that I think like you could go for, and I see periodically. And some are used more than others, but some of them are kind of they're okay. Let me talk about Aria. She's an okay unit. She can be used in some like aggro or standard teams. She requires usually specific setup and the right kind of team comp though, so she's kind of hard to use, but she can totally take over a game if the opponent isn't prepared for it. Now, she is kind of a late pick in the draft usually though, so definitely keep that in mind, and you definitely have to kind of gear your drafts towards trying to use her if you really want to. Celine. So, personally, I don't really think Celine is all that great. The reason that she's here is just because I think lower down, especially in like PvP, I think she's more useful, where people have less ways of dealing with her. But the thing about Celine is she just doesn't really work that well, because sometimes she might prevent your opponent from using a non-attack skill, right? But sometimes they can just deal with them anyways, and then they just kill Celine because she's usually pretty squishy, and then she's just out of the fight anyways. Because she needs enough speed to get a turn, enough damage to actually kill something, and enough tankiness to actually survive aggression, which can make it kind of hard. Now, she is okay versus characters like Lua, and I think late pick in the draft, she can be really great. She also sucks versus characters like Apocalypse Ravi that are picked all the time, which can be kind of a problem, because even if she kills something, Apocalypse Ravi then kills her and revives the ally, which kind of sucks. So just keep that in mind. But she's mainly just used as a specific counter pick. Charlotte. Now, I would almost consider putting Charlotte down to weak picks, just because you don't really see much of her and she's weak to a bunch of things. But every once in a while she comes back. I would put her really on the low end of decent picks, maybe towards weak picks at the moment. I don't think she's much of a priority to pick. She is good versus characters like Belian and Alencia and units such as that. A lot of units that do like weak hits that don't just do like really big attacks that can kill something. So that's why a character like Alencia or possibly Senya or Lion have like huge weaknesses against her, and the fact that she ignores anti-crit a lot of the time is great versus Senya or Diene or something. So I think she's okay though overall. Elena, I mainly have her here just because she's just an anti-cleave, realistically. She can work sometimes. I think some people really have a huge reliance on Elena and like using her a lot. A lot of other people aren't huge fans. I think she's just kind of okay, but I think the characters mainly and decent picks are characters that they can be used, and the characters in weak picks are just kind of like you wouldn't really use them all that often. Okay, Laika. This character actually became pretty popular at the end of last season, funnily enough. People run her incredibly fast. I'm talking like 300 speed, so not everyone can do that. And I know the top Korea player, KJ, was doing some cool stuff where he would have her be the fastest unit, and he would just sleep characters like Diene and other stuff like that by outspeeding them using her S3. If you soul burn her S3, it can almost be like a mini ambitious Tywin where you just keep sleeping their team and they lose all their turns and get the slow debuff, right? And you can also use her S2 to do something like push up strays because it causes him to dual attack, which then pushes him up, which was really cool. But it seems like she's an okay unit, and with Spatio-Temporal Fan, she could be decent as well. That's Lua's artifact to make an ally invisible. I think she's kind of cool and interesting, and I think she is definitely usable, but I think she has a high gear requirement for a lot of people. Flan. The reason I have her so low down is just because she's a cleave-only character, even though she is really good, and she has an insanely high gear requirement to truly make them good. Now, if you have insane gear, she's absolutely amazing, incredible cleave character. But she pretty much can just be a quintessential cleave opener where it just completely shuts down the opponent's team, defense breaks them, pushes up an ally, and just wipes them instantly. Really powerful. Kawerik. So this unit I would say is just kind of better than Kisei overall, especially because he can hold book. And also, he's about to get a buff, because all mage characters are about to have 7 extra speed in RTA. That's kind of a big deal for somebody like him, because he's the fastest mage in the game. He has 119 base speed, so he's going to be at 126. That's kind of insane. That's the same speed as Sid, so I think he might actually see a lot of use. He could possibly even be moved up to great picks. We'll see how it kind of pans out in RTA. But he's definitely very powerful. Him being able to use book and force reset somebody is really strong. He has great reach for invisible characters. Really nice to have. Hwayoung. This guy's a bit of a meme sometimes, but he's also pretty cool. He's mainly used as like an anti-cleave unit or anti-aggro unit, but you usually have to build him high effect resist, or if you don't build him high effect resist, you have to really protect him by putting like immunity or a cleansing or other things like that on him. Now, if you have something like Decrescent, which is Ervelin's artifact, he could just potentially wipe their entire team, which is kind of cool. But I don't know if I'd pick him over some of the others. He is very fun and very cool, though. And if you have him on like a counter set into Crescent, he can just sometimes pop off and wipe their team. Krau. He's used sometimes in RTA, but very rarely overall. He is still good at killing something like, let's say, Lionheart Sturmia or Remnant Violet, something along those lines, and he's amazing in Guild War. He's a godlike Guild War unit, if you're interested in that. But he's not used as much as some of these other knights, and people actually opted for using Yolha a little bit more than Krau in this recent season to kill units. Pavel, I think that he's fallen off a little bit more than he used to, but he's a cleave character. He can do high damage. I still use him, but he's not really the best compared to a lot of these popular Sid teams nowadays, but he still can kind of work. I think he's usable, and that's why I have him here, but I don't really recommend him compared to a lot of these other characters overall. Peira, she started to see more use in cleave teams, especially near to the end. People often pre-ban Desert Jewel Basar, or you might pre-ban Desert Jewel Basar, and then they pick her to use in some sort of really aggressive team. So you can sometimes kind of expect something like that, and I start to see a lot more either at the end of the season or at the beginning of this preseason. And I think she's still a decent unit to have overall, and she can take over a game when used correctly. Iseria, I mainly just have her here because newer players sometimes might be able to utilize her with a character like Tamarinne to kind of clear some challenge content. She's definitely unique in what she does, especially for PvE, and can be kind of helpful. If you really are struggling with PvE, she could be an okay pick to go for, but I don't really recommend her as much as somebody like Tamarinne, obviously. Tamarinne's 100 times better to choose. Violet. This is a character that I think a lot of people kind of overestimate. I really don't think Violet is all that amazing, and people always say, oh, pick Violet versus like everything, but he actually has so many weaknesses when the opponent knows what they're doing. Now, he is an okay unit versus certain teams. Obviously, if they have too many blue units, or they have, like, you know, Belai and Alencia or something, he can potentially just solo their whole team, which is pretty great. So he's still definitely useful, right? But also, he is an amazing imprint for Remnant Violet, which is a crit chance imprint. So I have him in decent picks, even though I considered putting him in great imprints. But yeah, that's kind of where I'd put him at the moment. Now, let me just talk about a few notable weak picks. I'd say most of these characters are ones you just should not choose. They're just not good. People don't really use them for anything, so I don't really recommend them. I will say Kisei, I think, is better than most of the characters in here and is definitely usable, but I just don't think that it's worthwhile picking her compared to most of these characters, especially something like Kawerik that kind of just does her job better. Especially with Hwayoung being nerfed, I think it means Kisei's even a little less usable than something like Kawerik because, you know, she's not as good, or like, she was better versus Hwayoung, so I think it's not that much of a difference. Not really a huge recommendation of her, but she is fun, she has high gear requirement, and she can do all right for sure. Next unit I would talk about, Melissa. Started to see her a little bit in some cleave kind of stuff, but I don't really think it's worthwhile building her compared to most other characters. More of a kind of gimmick thing, but she can do some cool stuff and deal with like effect resist BBK because she can hold book and soul burn. That's kind of cool as well, but I don't think it's worthwhile compared to some of these other characters. Ravi, she got buffed and I thought she'd be way better than she actually is right now, but I was completely wrong because the meta is so aggressive that she needs a really slow meta to get set up and get slowly into frenzy where she becomes really strong. But since we never really get to that point and the meta is so fast, she usually has a huge amount of trouble. Also, a character like Choux just completely slaps her, which is a big issue as well. So I would also keep that in mind. The other characters I just wouldn't really recommend choosing, and I think they're overall weak, so I won't really talk about them. Let's talk about these real quick. Great imprints. So these are characters that just are they're useful just because of their imprints. Most of them are not very good on their own. Villagers is an exception. He's really good in cleave, and he's a good imprint for the team. Lionheart Sirmia is the imprint that's really good. It's crit chance. Same with Closer Charles, also crit chance. Same with Designer Lilibet, also crit chance. And now top model Lulika is getting a crit chance imprint, so I have her there as well. And this is Sylvan Sage Vivian imprint, which is also crit chance. Crit chance is one of the highest value imprints. It makes building the characters way easier. So they're really good imprints for characters. Keep in mind the first imprint for a character is worth twice as much as every subsequent imprint too. So I don't know if you're interested, but it could be very useful for some of them. And obviously speed imprint is absolutely insanely amazing for Vildred. So that's always really good too. Now, it is also sometimes good to wait for his banner, though, because he also has a very good artifact along with him. So it could be worthwhile waiting just to pull in his banner so you can get him and his artifact at the same time. Great artifacts. These are characters that I would choose potentially just for the artifacts. I think Ervelyn can be used in some sort of cleaver aggro teams, but I think Decrescent is a really good artifact for him, for a character like Kayron or Remnant Violet. So, Fairytale Tenebria. Fairytale for a Nightmare is a really good artifact for Archdemon Mercedes and Solitaria, I think. You can also use Crown on Solitaria, but I think it's a really one-of-a-kind, amazing artifact. It's just better than Iella Violin for most characters, so I think it's really good. Cerise. I think this character is amazing to choose because she has Guiding Light on her banner. And I think what we've discovered, especially from the recent season, is that almost every ranger in the game wants Guiding Light. So having as many of that artifact as possible is great. You could do 100 summons and buy one from the shop, and you could also get one from the powder shop if you choose her, so that could be 2 right there. But people are starting to look at like, oh, I want like 5, 6 guiding lights, so it's starting to get kind of out of control. And if you really need lots of guiding lights, you might consider choosing her. For her herself, she's okay in some PvE, don't really see in PvP. Fairytale Tenebria, she does get 7 more speed, so she might actually be pretty good in RTA this season. We're not really sure, but that's a small possibility as well. Otherwise, she wasn't really all that amazing recently. Holiday of Fane. Now, I don't think her artifact is incredible, but it's a one-of-a-kind artifact in how it works, and I think it'll be really good with Bad Cat Armin, because it gives effectiveness and a chance to stun on your S1, and since Bad Cat Armin's S1 is AoE, could constantly just stun their team, and the effectiveness is great. I think that could be strong. It's definitely one in kind. I think her as a character is okay, but not really all that great. But she is a limited unit that didn't get a rerun, I believe, so you could consider choosing her for collection purposes as well. Luna. I don't think Luna is all that amazing, except she can be used in an aggro or cleave team, which can be pretty cool. And And I would say that her artifact is really good. Draco Plate, there's a lot of good warrior artifacts overall, like a lot of decent warrior artifacts. I think Draco Plate is definitely one of the best ones. A lot of characters are totally down to use it, even though there are some sort of other switches you could make. And, you know, if you want to use her in like some sort of cleaver aggro team with a big push and high damage to just one-shot stuff, you could also do that as well. She's totally usable in that way. Summertime Iseria. Her artifact is a must for her, and it's about to be a must for Pirate Captain Flan as well, so she's about to get a buff, which could be really good too. But her herself is good in cleave teams. She can be really strong. She kind of started seeing a little less use with the amount of cleanses and stuff that became really popular, but she's still a very good unit overall. And the main reason I have her in great artifacts and not like higher is just because I think her artifact is kind of special. And it's a one-of-a-kind thing that you kind of need for a character like her and Pirate Captain Flan. Like, she's not really a usable unit without her own artifact as well, so you have to really keep that in mind. Anyways, I think that kind of sums up most of the characters here. I think I pretty much hit all of it. You can't choose these characters. These ones were too recent, unfortunately. Sorry to say. I believe Zahhak can't be chosen. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that Zahhak can't be chosen. But yeah. All in all, I think that's about it. I hope that this helped you, and if you have any questions, I guess just leave them in the comments, and I'll hopefully be able to answer some of them. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like or subscribe to the channel, and I really appreciate you guys watching, and hope to see you next time.